Hi there, my name's Steve Sutcliffe and welcome to Tyre Seeker. So in this test, we've got a great collection of genuine budget tyres to try out. We've got a wet handling track, we've got a dry handling track, we've got typically changeable UK conditions, and one Volkswagen Up to test them on. So let's get cracking.
So from Admiral, we're testing the RCB 007. From Comforza, we've got the CF 350. From Dynamo, we're trying the Street H MH01. From iLink, we've got the L-Grip 55. From Joyroad, we have the Tour RX1. And from PowerTrack, we're testing the Adamas HP. As usual, we sourced all our budgets from an independent retailer to ensure total neutrality. And we tested each tyre in the wet and dry, not just for handling, braking and cornering, but also for comfort, noise and refinement. And just for good measure, we compared all our budgets against a more established mid-range tyre from GT Radial, just to see how well or otherwise they stack up, starting with the intriguingly named Joyroad on the wet handling circuit.
It's a top name, but not a particularly top tyre. I mean, there is just nowhere near as much basic grip or bite to the steering. But most worrying of all, under brakes. And it's kind of a recurring theme as amongst all these cheapy budget tyres. You just need more space in which to slow down and ultimately stop than you do with a decent tyre like a GT Radial fitted. The Joyroad is not bad. It has pretty good grip and bite under brakes. Pretty good grip mid-corner. There are no sharp edges to anything it does. It doesn't do anything unpredictable. So then we come to the PowerTrack, and it's incredible actually because the PowerTrack feels very similar to the Joyroad in the grip it has mid-corner, in the security, sort of okay security it has under brakes, pretty rubbish traction. It's like just about acceptably average, but no more. And then you come to the iLink, which I'd never heard of before, but actually it wasn't too bad. The iLink for me makes the best effort alongside the Admiral at replicating the grip quality, the breakaway characteristics, the braking stability, everything basically of the GT Radial, the decent tyre. It doesn't have as much grip as a GT Radial. The steering feels a bit vague when you turn into a faster corner like this. The traction control just immediately comes on, whereas if you've got the GT Radial fitted, you just turn into a corner like that and it grips and it sticks. So then we come to the Comforza and the Dynamo. Let's talk about the Dynamo first. This won't take long. It's really not very good at all. I was pretty shocked actually. The first time I drove this VW Up in a straight line, came to a corner, applied the brakes and tried to turn into the corner. I very nearly didn't make the corner at all. It's just astonishing how poor the grip levels are of the Dynamo relative to even say the iLink, let alone upper offer tyre. Poor under brakes, poor mid corner, poor traction, rubbish steering feel, rubbish front end bite. Forget it, don't go anywhere near the Dynamo. It's not great. But if you were forced to make a choice between the Dynamo and the Comforza, go for the Dynamo, because the Comforza, I think, is one of the worst tyres I have ever driven on. Basically, it's a van tyre, that's the problem. So therefore it needs a lot more weight to get it to generate any decent grip at all. The weight of this VW Up is just, well, it ain't as heavy as a van, is it? So therefore I'm guessing that that's the reason why it struggles to generate really any grip at all in the wet. Before we go and try any of these tyres around the dry track, which I think will be minorly terrifying, here's a little bit about our sponsors from eTyres. So our sponsors at eTyres are basically great, and that's not just because they give us the money to make these videos and have fun at test tracks and decide which tyres are good and which tyres are not good. They're great because they sell tyres at the best prices that you will find anywhere on the internet. And they don't care, there's no bias, they don't care who wins or loses or doesn't do very well in our group tests, because they sell all the tyres in all our tests. You get the best prices that you will find for any tyres anywhere on the internet, pretty much guaranteed. So check them out, etyres.co.uk. Right, back to the tyre testing.
Dry track next then. Let's see how terrifying our budgets are here, again compared with each other and beside the GT Radial.
I have to be honest, I'm pleasantly surprised, or I have been pleasantly surprised by all of them in the dry, because none of them are a shambles, nothing like as much as the Dynamo and the Conforza are in the wet. But it's always wet roads that where you come unstuck if you've got rubbish tyres. So they're all not too bad on the dry track. The GT Radial is the best by far, and it's also the quickest by over a second, well over a second. I know lap times don't mean anything at all when it comes to budget tyres, but it's just a means of checking kind of safety, really. I'm not really that worried about on the limit handling nuance when it comes to budget tyres, but what I am concerned about, what you should be concerned about when you're buying a budget tyre, is how well the car stops with a budget tyre fitted, wet or dry. Whether it affects the handling characteristics of a car like this, the VW Up, whether the grip mid-corner comes and goes in a predictable way, and they're all not bad. There isn't a real lemon amongst them on this dry track. The iLink and the Admiral, I think, are the two best in terms of replicating what the GT Radial can do around here, both in terms of time and feel. The Dynamo is okay in the dry. It's not a total shambles, which it is in the wet. The Power Track is okay. I don't think it's got anywhere near as much mid-corner grip as the iLink and the Admiral. I've sort of warmed to the Conforza slightly because it's just not appalling on the dry track. But it did get very hot. The grip did start to fall away quite quickly as the tyre got hot. It definitely doesn't have as much mid-corner mid-grip and kind of body control stability as any of the other tyres. The Joyroad's okay in the dry. It's not awful, but they really are. You can spend your money in better places. But there's just no snap to anything that the Joyroad does. It's better than the Dynamo and it's better than the Conforza, but not by much and not by enough to make a difference.
We rated each of our budgets out of 100 for braking in the wet and dry and for noise and ride comfort. And as you can see, the results were pretty mixed. The Joyroad lived up to its name to an extent, providing the most comfort and the least noise. The Conforza, on the other hand, did not. It was the loudest and least comfortable of all our budgets to drive on. The braking capabilities of our budgets were a bit more concerning, however, because not even the best performer, the iLink, was anywhere near as good as the GT Radial in the wet, even though it performed better relatively in the dry. And at the bottom of the pile, the Conforza and Dynamo, well, they were just shockingly poor, especially in the wet tests. In the more dynamic handling tests, well, none of our budgets shone, to be honest, and some were downright awful. Once again, the iLink was the least poor, followed by the Admiral, the Joyroad and the Power Track. We'd say each of these tyres was just about acceptable. But the Dynamo and, worst of all, the Conforza were either bad or shockingly bad. The Conforza lapping the wet handling circuit an incredible 14 seconds slower than the GT Radial. To be honest, none of our budgets come highly recommended. The iLink, Joyroad, Admiral and Power Track each performed, well, okay individually, the iLink being the least bad of the bunch. But even the best of our budgets are nowhere near as good as the GT Radial for overall performance. Hand on heart, not one of them gets a genuine thumbs up from us at Tyre Seeker. Instead, the iLink, Joyroad, Admiral and Power Track all get a basic recommendation from us. But the Dynamo and Conforza, they get no rating at all. They should be given a wide berth as far as we're concerned. Conclusion? Spend a little bit extra and get a lot more safety and performance from a tyre like the GT Radial if you drive a budget car like the VW Up. The cheaper alternatives, in most cases, simply aren't worth the risk.
Cheers for watching. Remember to subscribe if you like this video, and see you next time.